Hi, my name is Pandora Thomas. I came from California here to England, and I'm founder of the Black Permaculture Network and also Earth Seed Consulting. I talked a lot, actually we started with engaging people in their own legacy and this entire conversation around permaculture design and how is it rooted into us remembering something that is part of all of our legacies, that it's rooted in aspects of principles and practices from all of our cultures. We just have to source that. So people got to share that with a friend, kind of whose shoulders they each stand on. This room full of 600 people, it was brilliant. And then I went on to talk about how in my own life I had to constantly search for relevance, because especially as a woman of African American, Native American descent, oftentimes growing up, I didn't see people that looked like me framed as leaders around sustainability, or if people were pointed out, it was very limited how they were framed. So I talked a little bit about my own having to kind of go back and fetch my story to make it relevant. And then I went on to kind of testing. Several of us in California came together to test this idea of, if permaculture is about the problem as a solution, well, there's a problem of incarceration that's impacting many people. All of us, I argue, really impacting my family. And is there a way that if permaculture truly can be applied across the board, can it be applied to men and women coming home from prison in a way that's inspiring, empowering, and at the same time reconnecting them to their legacy? So that was my talk. I don't think it's out there. That's the thing. I think it's out there because we get caught up in, okay, there's the word permaculture, but then from there, I have several conversations with people, are you excited about health? Are you excited about understanding, do you recognize patterns in your own life? Do you understand the patterns that exist all around you? Yes. Do you realize that sometimes when you spend time in a natural setting, you feel a little better? Yes. Do you understand that there's patterns of how you spend money? So it's not even that people don't want to or shy away, although culturally there are some things, like in the United States, for a while there was this idea that certain pieces of the environment were for certain groups of people. So there is debunking that, but at its core, everyone's aspiring to connection and improving or changing their situation whatever way they deem. I think the potential of the permaculture community is not to be so boxed in, but how are we relating to all these other things that are happening? For instance, there are Buddhist principles that say similar things. There are these principles of Ma'at that are traditional African. There's the Black Panthers, 10-point. All of these principles that have existed, exist all over the world, we're not oftentimes making the connections. And so people feel like, well, that's credited to these two guys in Australia, which I would argue, I'm sure even those two guys don't want. It's kind of the Jesus syndrome. I'm sure for them, they were like, we're identifying this, we're seeing this, and then how can this grow? But it wasn't even their job. I really think for our generation now, I'm 42, so who knows what's my generation, but we're kind of the succession. So for us right now, like, I know young people in the United States, they're super trying to make links and make connections and not be kind of jolted and trying to make links between, no, I want to be into fashion and I want to care for the earth and I want to have music and I want to have fun and I don't want to feel like I have to be in a box to advocate. So that's what gets me excited, especially working with communities of color. We're more comfortable generally with difference, and also we have this celebratory way of moving through things and being resilient. And so it's just been plugging it into what we've already been doing, but also shedding the light on the practices that we have to shift in terms of designing the lives we live. And that's where the land-based stuff comes into, the food. But that's almost like, there's only so many ways you can deal with soil and grow certain food, you know what I mean? But it's the people piece. There's an innumerable amount of people on the planet. How do we really speak to people and inspire people to see that this is for them, and it's up to them to really create and deepen the relevance once they're turned on? We had 2 cohorts. Most people would be defined as African American or Asian American, Latino American, and we did some questions just helping people to kind of tap into their own relationship to land-based, gardens, land. All of them had something. All of them had either they had a family member with land or some type of a connection. So again, after the first day, rekindling that connection, and it's all about that principle of starting with kind of observing and interacting, but trying to start with where people are at and also then they get it. And so that was really powerful because I think there's this idea about who cares about what and what resilience is. And for me, I've never been incarcerated, but I think some of the ways of being that one has to be, from what I've been told, when you're incarcerated, and having to observe and interact with your environment in serious ways, having to really be clear about the patterns of how you're living, being conserving, just thinking about energy and how it's like, you really get reflective. And so we would try to communicate that they've actually, got the grounding to really slide right into permaculture design because they've been having to live it and are so committed to this idea of what have been the patterns in my relationships and how do I change them. And then they just expand that too in my relationship to water and my relationship to food. So a lot of times when people hear relevant, they're thinking, oh, for people of color or whatever, but it's like, no, relevant for wealthy people who have a lot of resources and want something to do, but even they wouldn't think permaculture was relevant because they're like, that's not for me. Or whatever the gamut, there's a lot of people who are excited about doing something, and just knowing that sometimes when you're introduced to permaculture design, it's such a shift that you just get motivated, and that there could be a key component of that that's relevant for every community. And it really depends on people representing certain communities to maybe be that bridge. Well, what I've seen, it's interesting because there's conferences in the US that there's so many different kinds of permaculture spaces. And I'm always, paying attention to like how many people or whatever to try to gauge who's represented. And here I've been really paying attention to like the age diversity and just the gamut of people connecting on so many different age levels and from so many different countries. So that's been really powerful. And I think, how do we then create functional connections? So it's not just we're all here together, but how intentionally being like, okay, you're in your 60s, I'm in my 30s, or whatever it is, let's come together and talk and think about with intention. So not just getting people together, but a place like this can actually foster functional connection and relationship building, because that's what we need. So we can be learning. Starhawk, who is my mentor, my dear friend, kind of plays that role for me. We kind of bounce ideas off of each other, but it's just good because we see the world so similar, like eye to eye. She just happens to be 20 years older than me. And so again, I think that can be represented at a conference like this, but I also think it has to be designed for. And so a lot of times young people come and they're kind of like, well, where's the space for me? So how do we have multiple spaces for connection in places like this? And hands down though, this is like how the energy feels. It's definitely because there's keynotes and there's breakout sessions. I've been to other conferences that it's like you're just all keynoting, this feels more broken up. I've gotten a chance to connect with people, and so there's all of this been designed in multiple layers of connection, again, which I think has really been powerful. And I just look forward to, I also feel like they want to take feedback and they want to hear what's working for people. And they're also encouraging people to talk to each other just about what's inspiring you, what's hopeful for you. And so I've seen that kind of sparking conversations where it might not have. Like at the lulls where there's quiet time, if someone's thrown a question, you're motivated to speak to a friend or something. No, I'm just really honored to be here. I go back and forth around, because I don't just work in the permaculture world. I do sustainability, but it shows up in many ways. And so I oftentimes go back and forth of like, what's my role in this community? But then actually it's probably good that I'm not feeling limited, because I'm such a kind of bridge builder, edge walker person. I think that's actually a good sign. And that there's space within the permaculture for someone like me to kind of slip in and slip out. It's not like I have to, whereas there's other design sciences where you study it and you kind of do that as a career. With this community, it's almost like, because once you get your permaculture design certificate, that's like the floor level. That's not the ceiling. And so you take it where you take it. And for that, that's why I can't not believe that who we credit with founding it weren't aware that it's going to become what it's going to become. Here's the first man, you know what I mean? It's like, you can't observe natural systems and not be aware of change. So that inspires me that no matter where it is now, it's going to continue to change and transform and reflect whoever comes and sees himself as a part of it, which is why I'm that much more committed to make that as broad and broad in all sorts of ways, but also as clear as possible that this is our intention.